and hopefully quite a few others throughout the year. So I'd like to introduce the first talker, Rodney Graham.
I'm just going to go through my work more or less chronologically, starting with my earliest exhibited work, which was done in 1976, a piece called 75 Polaroids. Here's the first slide. Is this one? No. Actually, I think perhaps I should turn this off. In the beginning, my work was concerned with photographic strategies. I was interested in photographic strategies, specifically dealing with representations of nature, and deploying systems that would be non-specific in a sense. And the first work where I feel I succeeded in this kind of attempt to capture nature kind of in a non-aesthetic way was in this piece called 75 Polaroids, which comprised 75 randomly shot Polaroid photographs done with a Polaroid, an old Polaroid 170 camera with a flash attachment. And I went into the woods, into forest areas, in the woods and parks around Vancouver. Set the focus at about 3 feet and kind of worked my way through the darkness, snapping as I went, kind of using the flash of the photographic apparatus as a kind of illuminating guide, something that would carry me forward to the next step. In other words, I would work off trails, on unbeaten paths, as it were. I shot hundreds of these, and then I kind of weeded them out till I got 75 that kind of suited my taste. And I mounted them in the first installation of the work. I mounted them in an eye-level frieze around 3 interior walls of a 12 by 12 foot room. They were mounted on MDF, and then and matted with little window mats, and then plexiglass over top of those. I was interested in 2 things. One to create a kind of like cinematic analog for this kind of progress through the forest, through darkness, and also to kind of suggest something of a natural history museum display of my own subjectivity during the course of making these photographs. I was interested in mainly the idea of the flash, the idea of the retinal image that kind of happened when that took place when the flash went off, and which revealed to me for the first time the subject that I was photographing, whether it be like a complex of roots or some shrubs or rocks or whatever. And what interested me too was the way in which, just as the image was, the negative retinal image was fading. You have to remember that this image, of course, is going to take a negative form. It's not positive. The way in which this a negative retinal image was disappearing, even as the Polaroid was kind of coming into being. I was just kind of interested in the kind of the dualism of that process, and then later I could sort of sift through them as if I was going back over a kind of a vague memory. It's just a detail of one. That piece was in 76. In 1979, I undertook 2 works that kind of came out of my thinking, my reflecting on the 75 Polaroids work and the possibilities of extrapolating from it. And the one that's the closest, I would say, to it is a piece called Illuminated Ravine that I realized on small ravine outside of the Simon Fraser University campus outside of Vancouver, British Columbia. It's basically an event or a kind of a happening where I brought out a gasoline-powered light tower or a gasoline engine with a tower with two 1,500-watt mercury vapor lamps, and brought this apparatus up to the edge of the ravine, tilted the tower into the ravine, put the lights on, put the engine on first, of course, and put the lights on, invited people to come and witness the spectacle for 2 hours, 3 nights running. It's a kind of a theater event. I was interested in this idea of, on one hand, of this kind of brutal interrogation of nature with this light, the idea of submitting nature to a kind of theater, or making it into a kind of a theater of operations, or an operating theater, something that with an implied sadistic component. Also, I was interested in this time in things like minimal music and punk rock music, and I was very interested in this idea of having very loud drones. And the engine contributed to this kind of trance effect. Also, the pulsing of the engine transmitted to the light itself a kind of irritating flicker, and then there was the added, to complete the kind of Wagnerian total work, the fumes that the machine spewed out kind of created a kind of intoxicating effect as well. This is installation view of a reconstruction of this work in 1988 in the same ravine. At the same time, actually concurrent with this piece, I realized my first camera obscura piece called Camera Obscura in 1979. And in the same way that I thought an appropriate way of approaching the representation of a ravine would be through this light interrogation, which I should also say came directly out of the idea of lighting in the 75 Polaroids, but an escalation of the kind of negative strategy of that work. In this case, I thought the appropriate way of representing a tree would be to invert it by means of a camera obscura. In other words, to create a kind of super functional architecture that served the purpose strictly of realizing an inverted image of a tree. And a tree seemed to me the perfect image for camera obscura representation, because it's always used as kind of a textbook example of the optical principle of inversion. Sorry, oops, oh, never get used to this. Actually, this slide shows it best, I think. I built this on a farm just outside Abbotsford, British Columbia, where I was born. I built the structure off-site, actually, and carried it in by truck into the location. And it was interesting to me that it was very difficult to move materials in and to build in this situation. So it was interesting. I had to find a way of precisely locating the building, and I did this by using a 5x7 field camera converted to a pinhole camera. But I removed the lens and put a piece of tin foil in place of the lens, and kind of determined the height and the angle of the actual structure. Took some exposures as kind of documents with the camera, then brought the building in and dropped it in so that the pinhole of the building corresponded to the pinhole of the camera lens, was in the exact same position and orientation. I was kind of interested in the same way that the building, in a sense, is a kind of exemplar of functional architecture, in the same way that the use of the camera for me was interesting to use it as a surveying tool, not as something for representation, but strictly as a surveying tool. And the reason it had to be on a slope, the building, of course, is because I wanted the tree to be centered on the screen wall. And to do that, obviously the center of the tree, the vertical center of the tree had to be at the same level as a pinhole. So finding the site was very important. It was not an easy thing to do, in fact. It was difficult to find a site that fit the description that this work imposed on it. Some other views of it. I thought of this building is kind of like taking its place among the other rural outbuildings in the area, like chicken sheds, outhouses, tool sheds, and things like that. I did think of it as a kind of a functional outbuilding. an outbuilding because it had a kind of exterior relationship to the tree in the same way that maybe a shed would have a relationship to another larger building. Also, I used construction techniques that were common for the houses, the suburban tract houses that were just then starting to encroach on this area. I used 4x8 pieces of plywood with the 2-foot centers. In other words, it looks a little bit like a portion of a tract house just under construction. In fact, now this place has been overtaken with the suburban development. I took a picture recently of a little skimpy little tree that had been planted about exactly where that larger tree is. Just to give you an idea of the pinhole of the size of a quarter in front of the building. I used a kind of a light tight corner entrance. This would be how I would exhibit the work in the context of a gallery or museum, with a photograph that was taken with the surveying device, that's the camera, an installation view and a model showing the structure of the camera obscura itself. In the 80s, I returned to this idea of the inverted tree because I was kind of interested in making tree images. That's one of the things that got me into making the camera obscura in the first place. And I thought it would be interesting maybe to work with a professional photographer and deal with these images of trees as kind of commissioned portraits, where I'd go with the photographer, go into the landscape and find a tree, take a portrait of it and hang it upside down. Later I started taking the photographs myself because it was more cost effective. But these are the first ones I did in Belgium. They're called Flanders trees, a series of trees shot around Flanders in 1987, I think. They were 6 by 8 feet, black and white, monochrome color prints. This is a series of Oxfordshire oaks shot, I think, in 1991. One of a series of Oxfordshire oaks. Again, 6 by 8 feet, slightly sepia tinted. I printed them on color paper because black and white paper doesn't come in big enough rolls, basically. Otherwise, I would have done them on black and white paper. I wanted a massive scale. That's a cedar tree from Stanley Park in Vancouver, done in about 91, I think, 92. I did a series of 9 of these. I was interested in the sort of columnar effect of these trees. In '86, I realized a model of a camera obscura based on the earlier camera obscura, but I wanted to make one to be installed in an urban context. This is called Millennial Project for an Urban Plaza. The idea was that the camera obscura theater would be installed on a tower, on a platform on a tower, facing a sapling in a large plaza that would be planted, with the idea that when the sapling reached maturity, it would be centered on the screen. So, if I think this would be a 60-foot tower, assuming that the tree would grow to a full height of 120 feet, then it would form a picture. Otherwise, for the rest of the time, you'd just be looking at images of the city. 2 spiral staircases lead up to the platform, and then there are 2 bank-type rotating light-tight doors on either side. I made a later version of this model with the mezzanine level cappuccino bar. I don't have any slides of that. It's just another pair of trees out of order there. Just last spring, I realized a piece that is related to my exhibition at the Lisson Gallery, because I'm showing a model of this work. It's a piece called Camera Obscura Mobile. I was asked to create a sculptural installation for a park, actually an arboretum near Rouen, the Arboretum d'Harcourt near Rouen, France. And I was interested that in this arboretum was begun in the 18th century by someone interested in botany who decided to bring a bunch of North American species of trees over and plant them. And so this park is full of Douglas firs and cedar trees that are commonly found in North America. It was kind of expected that I would do something the original idea was that I would just take some photographs of these trees, but I thought it would be more interesting to go back to the camera obscura idea, but to make a mobile one, and one that had a specific itinerary. So I thought, well, I wanted to make something that would fit into the context of this chateau, because it's around on the property of the chateau, and it would look kind of appropriate in the context of the, or would not look inappropriate or totally out of place. And I found this. This is a picture in a catalog of this mail carriage circa 1904 in an American museum collection, and I managed to get a hold of the person who, an expert who knew how to reconstruct these carriages, and I had him make an exact replica of this mail carriage. It's really just a rural mail delivery wagon. See if I get a better picture of it. I'll go forward. Which I'd modified into a camera obscura by adding a kind of this teak box on this end of the carriage. Here's the front. Obviously, it leads to the horse carriage. There's a teak box which, when folded out, has a bellows and a lens apparatus in it, and a sliding that slides out, can be focused. So and there's seating on the inside of the carriage. So if you sit in the inside of the carriage with the door shut, the aperture is at your shoulder. Two people can sit in there, and there's a circular screen on the other end, in which you can view the exterior landscape. This is upside down. Mistake. It should be upside down. Obviously, that's a photograph taken inside of the circular screen. The screen is suspended. Is out about a foot from the back wall, the wall you're facing, and it's on this kind of screw mount, so that you can focus it by turning it like a steering wheel. The idea too was that this would move around every month to a different location, and a postcard image would be made of that site. It would be left on that site for a month. And a postcard image would be made of that site, which would be sold in the gift shop of the chateau. So the idea, I was playing on the idea of an image delivery camera obscura, as a kind of, in this case, as a kind of image delivery system, which delivered kind of postcard views, and in fact was partly responsible for the creation of postcards, which could be just sold and disseminated. Another view. This is going back again to just after the period when I realized the illuminated ravine and the camera obscura. Two works that kind of I consider to be a pair. I made as a pair, and I plan to exhibit as a pair. And there's a piece called Two Generators, and the other work I'll talk about briefly is called Lens, and it's the first text work. I realize it's the first time when I veered into a kind of area involving text. This piece essentially was a kind of domestication of the illuminated ravine piece. It's just bringing it into a cinema context. It's designed as an installation for a cinema, and it comprised one 400-foot roll of 35 millimeter film that was exposed facing it with the camera directed towards a river on which both sides of the river were occupied with a diesel generator powered xenon lights. So on one side of the river I had like a huge 50,000 watt or something xenon light powered by a big diesel generator. On the other side of the river, further downstream, I had another generator and xenon light. I set the camera and the sound recording apparatus up in one position, rolled the film, then had the engines, had assistants turn the engines on and the lights on in a particular order. First of all, I had the engine downstream comes on, then the lights that engine powers come on, then the closer engine comes on, then that light comes on and illuminates the entire scene. The lights and the engines are then turned off in reverse order when the film is almost ready to run out. after about three minutes. So the structure of the film when it's exhibited or in a cinema is darkness with river sounds, just pure white noise. You hear one engine fire up, then a small light come on and illuminates part of the river. Then the other engine comes on, illuminates the entire river. Then for about 2.5, almost 3 minutes, the river is illuminated by both lights, which don't. Neither of the diesel generators had governors on them, as you'd normally use if you're making a film, so that there's a constant flicker and an interference kind of pattern set up in the light. Also, because the engines are operating at different RPMs, there's a kind of a phasing pattern that happens between the two engines too, so you get this deep bass pulsation, this kind of boom, boom, boom kind of sound, deep kind of pulsation through the whole thing. And I was interested in that effect quite consciously. It was, in terms of developing this kind of trance idea that I was working on in the other illumination piece. I wanted to create this kind of slightly overwhelming kind of musical effect. So the way I exhibited this work is as a loop in a cinema, but it's a 35 millimeter film. It's difficult to realize as an actual loop. So the looping agent in this case becomes a projectionist. I just hire a projectionist for an hour at a time, instruct the projectionist to dim the house lights, project the film in which this series of lighting events happens, allow the projector to once the film is spit out the other end, allow the projector to project about 5 seconds of light right on the white light on the screen, which happens to be the same kind of light that I use to illuminate the river, xenon light. Then turn it off, then put the house lights back on again and rewind the film, and then go through the whole cycle. So that, as Jeff Wall pointed out in an essay that he wrote for a catalog about my work, it is a little bit like this idea of the whole institution of cinema kind of unfolding at a kind of accelerated rate. Because you're seeing this. Also, I like the idea that people could come in and leave whenever they wanted. They could come in the middle of a cycle, go out and have coffee, come back and see another one or not. Sorry. As I said, this was intended to be a companion work for the first textual work I realized, and this work's called Lens. This work also has a direct relationship to the 75 Polaroids piece that I did, my earliest photographic work, because it has to do with wandering in a forest landscape, being lost in a forest landscape. This was 1983. I was interested in that time in strategies of appropriation that were becoming then current, this idea of appropriation art. But I wanted to kind of appropriate and extrapolate. That was the project that I defined for myself. I wanted to deal with text, but I wanted to add something to them. I sort of failed for a long time, and then I found accidentally this text by George Buchner, German writer of the, I guess 1820s, I think, which itself is which is a fictionalized account of an actual historical playwright, Lenz, Gottfried Lenz, who was a minor playwright around the circle of Goethe, and who was diagnosed. Modern medicine diagnosed as a schizophrenic. The story that Buchner writes is the account of Lenz's visit to a pastor in a small village in the Black Forest, Pastor Oberlin. In fact, it's based on Oberlin's accounts of Lenz's stay, and the story begins with this description of Lenz wandering through this mountain landscape. Describing this in this very rhapsodic language, this very, very beautiful, spectacular kind of meteorological phenomenon, the beautiful mountains, whatever, and interspersing with these giving little indications at the same time that Lenz is very disturbed and it is, in fact, is undergoing a kind of psychotic episode. Essentially, what happens is just to give you an idea of the text here, with a certain, I don't know whether you can read that. Anyway. What happens in the story, as Buchner tells it, is that Lenz visits the village with Pastor Oberlin has this kind of psychotic episode where he jumps into a fountain, is rescued by the villagers, is put to sleep, wakes up. The next morning he goes out with Oberlin to visit another village, to visit Oberlin's flock in another village. And what happens at that point is I loop the story. And I did this by exploiting a typographic or kind of peculiarity of the original, of the particular English translation. And that is that this phrase, "through the forest," occurs twice in the story within a area of a space of 1,400 words in a very similar grammatical context. So what I did was I had the phrase set first time so that "through" fell at the bottom of the first page and the forest fell at the top of the second page. And the second time the phrase "through the forest" occurred, I had the word "through" set on the bottom of, I made sure that it fell at the bottom of page 5. So then the story would, then the next time you read it, because the way I bound the book, it would go back to page 2 again, so that the story would read 1, 2, 3, 4, the pagination of the story would read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what happens is that Lenz, upon preparing for his second voyage to the second village with in the secure company of Oberlin, who he relies on, he all of a sudden finds himself alone again, walking towards the first village. It's a kind of a slightly sadistic short-circuiting of the story. But I was interested in doing this in a kind of a precise, very materialistic way, like by respecting the precise binding structure of the book. And in order to, I can just show you very briefly how the book was structured. The text is, my version of the text, or the truncated text, is set on 5 pages, which occupy two sheets of paper. Page 1, on which "through" falls at the bottom, where "through" falls at the bottom. The conjugate leaf of that, which would be blank, as would the back of the page 1. And this other sheet containing 4 pages, 2, 3, 4, and 5, with "through" falling in the bottom of page 5 and "the forest" at the top of page 2. And just by folding and reverse folding the book, like this one sheet of paper this way, this way, this way, and then interleafing it, I create a signature. And then by, of course, linking these signatures together, I create a book. So on one hand, the idea was to make a kind of, to build up a book as a kind of sculptural entity through this laborious repetition of pages and words. The slipcase became kind of an important part of this work. This is a view of, this is a very misleading, a view of the book looking down on it. I just did it on a copy stand. It's only about this big, the whole thing. But, again, it was Jeff that pointed out in his essay that he wrote that the slipcase kind of is an essential element because it becomes a kind of constraining element, kind of a clamp that keeps the system from going on interminably. But also I was thinking of making a nicely proportioned book. The final result was to create a nicely proportioned book. And all my text works proceed backwards from the idea of a book. I have an idea of a book, and then I proceed to write it first. It's not a writerly approach, it's more of a sculptural one. A couple of years ago, I realized, I had realized with the help of Andy Everett here in London, this reading machine for Lenz, which is just because of just dealing with the problem. I wanted to deal directly with the problem of exhibitability. Is that a fingerprint? Sorry, that's really horrible. Whatever that is. But so I made this kind of reading machine where where the page 1 is just between glass like this, and pages 2, 3, 4, and 5 can be read. So it's a convenient way of reading the book rather than leafing through it, and it makes the junctures very clear. In the original book, it's sometimes difficult to tell where the joins are unless you really know. Oops, going. Actually, I'm going to skip past this because it's complicated. Move directly to. I want to deal with the architectural context of this particular work. It might be of interest to you. I said that I wanted to make a work of active interpolation into a text. I wanted to appropriate a text of an author, and preferably an already published one, already typeset one, and insert my own writing into it. I can't figure out what that is. Yeah? Ooh. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, this book is called it's kind of distracting. It's called The System of Landor's Cottage. It's a 312-page novel that extrapolates from a 20-page story by Edgar Allan Poe. I found this text kind of by accident. I was interested in it partly because it had a certain resonance with the Lens text, and with even in my earlier Polaroid piece, it centered on the idea of somebody being lost in a kind of forest landscape. The text it's actually a magazine piece that Poe wrote in. It was his last published story, I think, from 1847, something like that, 1849. And it's a kind of a magazine piece. He did kind of a travelogue, just evoking this kind of beautiful landscape in which the narrator is traveling in the Hudson River Valley. He finds himself lost, and in the course of looking for the main road, again, he finds this very, very beautiful little sequestered valley in which there's in the middle of the valley, a very beautiful little cottage. He goes on to describe this cottage in very, very precise detail. And it's known, in fact, that the cottage is based, the description of the cottage is based on the description of Poe's own house in Fordham, which is now a museum in the Bronx, a little Poe museum. I've visited it. It's a beautiful little museum. Essentially, it's considered to be, in a way, Poe's kind of manifesto of interior decoration, in the same way that he, in a work that preceded it, this called The Domain of Arnheim, he outlined his kind of fantastic landscape gardening theory, where this gardener is able to, a character is able to build this vast, beautiful garden. He has no limits to his resources, and is kind of he's able to build this very, very beautiful gardening scheme. The Landor's Cottage is considered by some critics to be like a kind of a homely version of the same thing, where he kind of dealt with the restrictions of his own poverty, because he describes this lovely little cottage with flowers around it, and the interior is very nicely done, but all done in a very, very, very poor way, or economical way, let's say. Poe describes the outside of the house, the exterior of the house, from one vantage point at the entrance to this a little path that goes into the valley. In the course of the narrative, the Poe's narrator, Poe's first-person narrator, goes down to ask the owner of the house directions to the main road, gets these directions, end of story. So it's basically a completely descriptive work. Something that nowadays would be in a magazine would be a photo journalistic essay or something. It would be in that period, of course, wouldn't be photographic images accompanying. I was struck by the description of the house, and particularly by the very precise metrical description which Poe gives of the. That's just a picture of the back of the book. Gives of the house, so precise, in fact, that you can build in the same way that people have made models of the Temple of Jerusalem based on a biblical description. You can make a very precise model of it, and I worked with an architect friend and made a model based on Poe's description with all the dimensions. Poe describes a house made up of three wings, what he calls the main house, the west wing, and the north wing. I'm going to make some reference here to again some diagrams, show you exactly how my strategy worked. Right? He says the main house is 16 feet by 24 feet by, he says, not more than 18 feet high. For reasons which will, I hope, become clear, I made that dimension 17.888 feet. He says that the west wing is 1/3 smaller in all dimensions than the main house. The north wing is 1/3 smaller than the west wing in all dimensions. And on that basis, because I noticed that there's something, a point of entry in there, and I wanted to find a way of making an insertion into a text where I had a point where I could enter and add something. So I thought, well, since I had really nothing to say, in a sense, what I should do is make an architectural addition to the house. I should just add a wing onto the house. So I decided to add, and in fact, that's what I did. I added this wing here, which is called the annex. What I did was I extrapolated from this kind of system that's implied in here to create another kind of structure. I realized that given the information that Poe is given, the elevation and the plan of the house, it's possible to represent the three wings two-dimensionally as a kind of two-dimensional diagram here, like so. Now, I don't know. Can you see over here? Yeah. So the main house here, it would represent each wing as a triangle. The main house is a triangle, the hypotenuse of which is 24 feet, and this dimension is 16, and this is 17.88. It just happens that 16 is 2/3 of 24 as well, and because of that, you can create this this structure so that the hypotenuse of the triangle, which represents the next smallest wing, it has the 16-foot dimension, so it's 10.6 here. The north wing is a third smaller, so that the hypotenuse is there. It's 10.6. So what you have, in fact, and then so what I did was I added it in the annex, which is a third smaller than the north wing in all dimensions, because there's obviously a system. That's the system that I followed. You could also add another wing that would be a third larger in all dimensions. You could keep on going. Obviously, the structure is you have a kind of a radius vector here, which is moving systematically, and it's defining a logarithmic spiral. If you trace these points here on the triangle. So I was kind of interested because there was a possibility for expanding on Poe's story because there's already an implied spiral in his story if you read the numbers a certain way. In other words, these elements are already there. This structure is already there. I merely add this, or I could add this if I want to. So what I did then was to first of all describe the third wing, the so-called annex, from the outside position, from the point where Poe's narrator would first see it. So I described this kind of crystalline architectural structure that bears no relationship to the architectural style of the original building. I describe it as a kind of anomaly from this one position. In other words, I cut into Poe's text at that point. There's a certain sentence where I cut in and make this into. Then I cut out again and allow Poe's text to take over as the narrator goes down into the valley and visits Mr. Landor and asks directions. I have him go right inside the house, and when Mr. Landor leaves the room for a minute, I have the narrator, the first-person narrator, go into the inside of the room that I've constructed, where he sees this very strange writing machine that's inscribing a kind of spiral shape, identical to the one I just described to you. The spirals. Actually, I won't go into description. Essentially, it's a kind of a writing machine. And Landor surprises him, and the narrator asks Landor, "Can you please explain this?" And Landor subsequently explains that the annex that I added was the original part of the house, and that the rest of the house that Poe actually describes in the story, becomes an extrapolation of my original annex, which in my story is built by Mr. Landor's father. So the whole piece is the story that Poe writes it really relates to Poe's Landor's how can I say it, sort of architectural tribute to his father, who built the original. And the annex itself is very small. It's only about 4 feet high by 7 feet. It's like basically just big enough to sit down in. And so, in the course of 24 hours of narration, very much like the kind of Arabian Nights situation, Landor just expounds his theory, explaining every aspect of this little machine that is inside the building, which is in fact a writing machine that just inscribes endlessly that spiral formula. But in explaining the components of it in a kind of Raymond Roussellian way, he generates stories and stories and stories within stories, until it's finally revealed that Landor's architectural ambition as basically as a continuing tribute to his father's architectural genius, who discovered this, what I call the sesquialteral spiral, that Landor is planning on building wing upon wing upon wing according to this expanding system, and then eventually he shows drawings to his architectural drawings to the narrator, and the narrator realizes the entire landscape that he's traversed becomes overtaken with this crystalline kind of architectural incrustation. So in other words, all of nature just becomes overtaken with this architectural kind of delirium. So that was the structure I used, and I was interested because it set up parameters. Like I knew I had to describe every component, I had to create a machine, describe every component, and have it lead to that end. But basically my way of staking a claim within the story was to tell the story of Landor's father, was to go back a generation. Just another view of the model. The annex actually is tucked in here. I made a model of the house as it is described by Paul. The only way the annex exists only as a description. I made no models of it. There's no visual representation of it. To view the front of the house. Quickly want to go to another piece that's kind of an addendum to that piece. I found out around the same time I was working on the Landor's Cottage piece that Herman Melville, almost contemporaneously, had written a story that involved a kind of architectural addendum to a country house that was again based on autobiographical material. He had in fact bought a house near Pittsfield in Massachusetts, to which he had added a veranda. He, Melville, had physically added a new veranda. He incorporates this in a story, although he doesn't acknowledge it as autobiographical, a story called The Veranda, where the first-person narrator, again, a first-person narrator like the narrator in Poe, buys a house and adds a veranda onto the north side of the house. Somewhat controversial thing to do in this local neighborhood because the most splendid view is on the south. But he wants to build the veranda on the north because he wants to look at this, be able to sit on the veranda and look at this mountain that entrances a mountain called Greylock. And while he's sitting one day he's sitting in this chair and kind of looking out at looking at the mountain, sitting on the veranda, looking out at the mountain, and he sees this kind of little point of light kind of reflecting off something near the top of the mountain. This little glimmer of light, and he notices this repeatedly, and he undertakes this expedition to kind of find out what this source of light is. So he takes a hike one day, takes a hike up the mountain, and he finally finds a little cottage in the kind of sequestered in the trees, but near the top of the mountain, in which there's this kind of young woman, kind of melancholic figure who introduces herself as to him, and they have a kind of a strange conversation. She lives alone with her brother, and she talks about how sometimes she sits out on her porch and looks down on the plain below and sees this around dusk and sees this little glinting off something, and he realizes it's the light glinting off the shingles of his roof, and that she's sort of they have this kind of very strange connection. So I made this addition to the story, a very minor addition, unlike the addition I made to Landor's Cottage, which was like 300 pages long almost. This edition is one page. I did an edition in French with a Belgian publisher who I work a lot with, Yves Gavert. 2 books back to back. I don't think you can see very clearly. Two versions of the book bound back to back. One is a new French translation of the book, of the story, original story by Melville, and the other one is the same translation of the story by Melville with one additional page by me, in which I describe the addition of an architectural Carpenter Gothic bracket onto one of the columns of the veranda. Again, this is actually architectural detail. It's kind of contemporaneous with the story. This introduction because with the introduction of the scroll saw and that architects, builders, let's say, like home builders would make these sometimes ornate. You see these ornate kind of gingerbread brackets. I install one on one of the columns in the, sorry, I install it on one of these columns. Right there, again, in the text, by describing it, and again, appropriating Melville style in the same way that I tried to appropriate Poe's style. And I describe it just at the point where he sees this point of light on the mountain, and I install the, so that the scroll work of the spiral kind of points towards this point. So I do a very filigreed kind of description of this little wooden bracket and describe it at that point in the story. I won't go beyond that other than to say it was a, the idea was to make a very small, minor architectural addition to a story, to the house of a story. I'm going to quickly go through some of the couple of musical works that I've done based on musical systems. This one is sort of quite related in a way, a piece called Parsifal, to the architectural megalomania of Landor's Cottage. This is kind of a musical version of the same kind of infinite extrapolation idea. And it's based on an anecdote that I heard concerning Wagner, concerning Wagner's the production, preparation for the first performance of Parsifal in Bayreuth in 1882. And it concerns a scenographic difficulty that he encountered during the so-called transformation scene when Parsifal is walking towards the Temple of the Grail. In fact, he's walking again endlessly through a landscape, or not endlessly in this case, but through 4 minutes of music. The scenographer had devised some moving scenery for this 4-minute orchestral passage that. It involved three large rollers with canvas and gauze with trees painted on them, and they would be wound in one direction while Parsifal walked, like on the stage like this, to create the illusion of his movement through a series of vaulted clearings. Finally, at one point, they would all sync up so that there was like an entranceway, and he could go through the 3 curtains. So there'd be 3 openings, and then the last scene, which would be not rotating, it would be fixed, would be pulled up, would raise up, and it would reveal the Grail Temple. It was an enormous problem to sync this the music up with this very clumsy hand-cranked apparatus. Nowadays, of course, it's a simple matter with machinery, and in fact, it later was mechanized. But there's a famous instance where the scenographer asked Wagner to write more music, and he said, "I do not write music by the meter." He refused to write more, but his assistant, Engelbert Humperdinck, his assistant on the project, went back to his rooms and wrote out 9 bars of music, which he added to the 24-bar original score of Wagner to make a 33-bar loop. In other words, what he did is he really made a loop so the orchestra leader could carry the orchestra through as many of these iterations of the loop as were necessary for the stage and for the music and the stage machinery to be synced up. I luckily got a hold of this 9-bar supplement called Supplement to Number 90. And I kind of did several pieces based on it because I was fascinated on it. First of all, this idea, this endless wandering, this loop, it almost was like a repetition of the situation that I'd encountered with Lens, that I found myself in with this Lens piece. And the work that I made here is called is the final sort of the culmination of these works, and it's a sound installation. Based on the manipulation of 7 bars within the 33-bar loop. And again, I'm just going to make quick reference to some old diagrams here. Yeah. Okay, now the original passage is at section number 90. This commences 4 minutes of music. Commences there. 9 bars, 4 minutes of music. Humperdinck adds 24 bars to create a loop. like this. It can be played as many times as possible for the stage to sync up, and then it's back to 90 again and on to the rail tempo. What I did in the final kind of version of the piece is I found in section 89, when you looping back and you go to section 89 again, I took 7 bars following in section 89 and extended them to 47 bars and assigned to different sections of the orchestra different numbers of lengths of loops using prime numbers, so that the flutes would play the same 3 bars over and over again. The oboes would play the same 5, French horns would play the same 7, the trumpets or something, I can't remember what, would play 11, 13, 17, etc., etc. So 7 bars, 11 bars would be 7 bars plus 4 bars of rest. 13 bars would be 7 bars plus 6 bars of rest. 17 would be 7 bars plus 10 bars of rest. Going right down the score, actually I put the clarinet at the bottom. The clarinet played 47 bars of music, 7 bars plus 47 bars of rest. The music at this point is actually quite uneventful. I chose a place where there's not that much happening, but the structure, by using prime numbers, of course, they're divisible by themselves in 1, so that the flute and the oboe here are not going to sync up until 3 times 5 or 15 bars have elapsed. So the flute and the oboe and the trumpet or whatever that is would be 3 times 5 times 7, which is like 105 or something, no? But the whole orchestra doesn't sync up to itself until 3 times 5 times 7 times 11 times 13 times 17 times 19 times 23, etc., times 47 bars have elapsed, which doesn't seem like all that long of a time, and in fact, in the scheme of the original, if the music is played in its original tempo, it's over 39 billion years before it syncs up to itself again. So this represents the system of asynchronous loops that play and play and play in phase, although there are micro differences. The music essentially always sounds the same, but it's varying slightly, almost inaudibly. So what happens is in a certain hypothetical world, or say a parallel universe, at section number 90 during the premiere performance of the opera, the orchestra entered into Humperdinck's supplement, which of course they did, but in this particular reality, they also, subsequent to that, entered my system and have been playing it ever since. So I calculated the phases forward so that this is a real-time installation. The 14 speakers correspond to the 14 sections of the orchestra, and each one is calculated at its current phase. So when it's exhibited in real time. So you know that the clarinet is playing, when it's playing something, it's playing what it was playing. It should be playing at that time if it had been playing since 5 p.m. July 26, 1882. 5 p.m. being the time at which this would be reached. Slightly hypothetical, and there's no way I can, know exactly that it was that time, but I calculated the phases on that basis anyway. This is a version of the fold-out score. Oh, 2 slides in the same. I have a ghost image of a poster there, but that's just a shot showing some students, and I did an installation at the Belkin Gallery in Vancouver, where I had students come in and play noon-hour recitals, and they'd come in at 11:45, and they'd play until 12 o'clock. And as I explained to them, the most important thing about this piece is punctuality. You have to show up on time, and if you're not there at exactly 11:45 to the minute, then there's no point, because everything is calculated from that point. The score indicates that they have to be there, they have to start, otherwise they go out of sync. So there was no tardiness tolerated. Just quickly, I'm going to describe this another musical installation on this kind of, again, a fairly large scale, but this is a piece that doesn't take years and years to unfold, but exactly one day, exactly 24 hours, exact one mean solar day, whatever, exactly 24 hours to the millisecond. And it's a manipulation of some piano exercises of Czerny called the School of Velocity, where I submitted to I took the first 1,100 something notes of the School of Velocity, this set of piano exercises for virtuosos, and which were involved in a steady pulsation, a steady stream of notes. And I slowed the piece down systematically, so that using actually a principle derived from Galileo's law of falling bodies, using the time squared law, so that I place all the notes on their squares. All the marked beats now fell on their squares. So the first one would follow, the first marked beat would be played at the beginning at 9 a.m. in the morning. The second one would follow not on the second beat, but it would fall on the fourth. The third one would fall on the ninth beat. The fourth would fall on the 16th, the fifth on the 25th, whatever. So you see what I'm doing is inserting more rests in between. It works similar to the Parsifal piece because it does involve the interpolation of rests. So what happens is the piano just slows down over the whole day. And it slows down at a rate that's analogous to the acceleration of a pianist falling through space in free fall. So the slowing down is, I mean, it's like actually a direct inversion, or in a way a direct analog, because I'm mapping kind of sort of time onto time. I'll show what we did, and I was very much inspired by this was first shown at the Listen Gallery originally in book form a couple of years ago, and then my last exhibition there, and then was realized as a frame piece. This is the Renaissance Society in Chicago. We managed to get 1,300 pages up. There's one page for every minute of the day, and every musical event is highlighted in red. Otherwise, everything else is rests. So there's you kind of get this weird patterns of trajectories. They seem to kind of arcing trajectories of note events, highlighted note events. Again, I was really thinking of quite consciously sort of citing Hanna Darboven's installations. This is a particularly relentless installation of this work. But kind of this is an installation in a different configuration at the Helen and Morris Belkin Art Gallery in the University of British Columbia. I got them, I think, about 9 high, which it was quite nice in this space because I managed to create a kind of very kind of overwhelming kind of scale. I like that. It wasn't spread out as the other installation. Again, I'm just going to put. This is a recent work on the subject of rest. This is a videotape that I made, a video document called Halcyon Sleep. It was shown this summer at the group exhibition at the Listen Gallery. It's a performance that this slide is flipped. It's a performance that I undertook in '94, where I had myself. I went to a motel on the outskirts of town, outside of Vancouver, kind of near where I used to live, in the suburbs. And I took a double dose of a sedative Halcyon to put myself to sleep, and then I had my brother and a friend carry me home and put me to bed. The idea being, I was interested in the idea of sleeping in the back of a car during a car trip. It's a kind of infantile regression kind of piece in many ways. I always loved the idea of waking up in the back of a car sleeping, and I like the kind of dream image of lights kind of going around you as you're kind of lying. Also, I was interested in the idea of kind of inverting the idea of kidnapping. In this case, it's a benign, kind of benign kidnapping, where instead of being taken to the outskirts, like in a film noir film, you'd be taken from the center of the city to somewhere on the outskirts of town in a little shack. In this case, I was taken from a motel on the outskirts of town and carried home and put into my own bed. In a kind of a very friendly situation. So I want to kind of invert that kind of convention. At the same time, I wanted to invoke it visually. It's sort of about the periphery and the center too, in a way, about the center of the city and the outskirts of the idea of the outskirts. I'm going to skip back, please. I'm just going to close by talking about a couple of other kind of pieces that I showed. I showed this work in the last exhibition, a version of this work in the last exhibition at the Listen Gallery. It's a work I kind of want to continue. It's part of a series I'd like to pursue, this James Bond series. The piece is called Casino Royale, and it comprises, this is really irritating, this effect. a small jud-like box, and I've worked with these sort of jud shapes before, with different colored plexiglass, stainless steel, little box, meant to be mounted on the wall with green plexiglass or different color, another color on the top and the bottom. So it looked like a very small single jud box. But in this case, it has a book placed face down on the bottom piece of plexiglass so that you can read it. And it's called Casino Royale because I deal with that text of the first James Bond novel, Casino Royale. And it's subtitled Sculpture de Voyage because the idea is you can take it on your trip to a hotel on a trip and install it in your hotel room. So you could lie in bed there, for example, and read the text as it's kind of lying down like this. But the page is open at a very particular section in the text, and this is I think it's in the first edition. It's page 109, 110. It's the scene where Bond is being tortured by Le Chiffre, the villain of the novel, who has Bond stripped naked and strapped to a bentwood chair from which the caning is being removed, and he's beating him underneath with the carpet beater, trying to get information from him. So it's like Fleming really excels at this kind of sadistic description. As you can, obviously, if you've read it, you know it's kind of horrible, but. He's particularly good at describing race cars and gambling and sort of scenes of sadism. But I thought it was interesting to kind of appropriate that text in a Judd-like way, and also to kind of create a kind of slightly feeling of ill comfort when you're viewing the work, looking at a Judd and kind of feeling kind of embarrassed. Because the book itself, it kind of looks like a kind of buttocks as well when it's like this. So you really feel like you're in a strangely voyeuristic position vis-a-vis the work. So there it is. If you'd be standing underneath it and reading this text, and you can see it. I did this deluxe edition with the listen gallery for the last exhibition of. With the first edition of Casino Royale, which is not very, it's happening again, which is not very easy to find, but it's installed in this valise with instructions for installation, special screwdriver, the Judd-like box, the screws and screw mounts, etc. And the valise is actually, what interested me was I was able to, this is strictly anecdotal, but the piece is quite anecdotal anyway. We were able to find the manufacturer who did the valises for all the earliest Bond films, and this is sort of a replica of the valise that Sean Connery carries in Dr. No. All of them, if you look at the Bond films and you look at them, whenever there's a valise or something, they're always black leather with red leather on the inside. For example, in I can't remember the one set in Japan where there's a little helicopter and this great big huge valise comes out. They wheel it out and. Q wheels it out and opens it up, and this little helicopter is all in pieces on this beautiful red background. This again is a companion piece. I had made an earlier version of this sort of. Again, it's a page interpolation, similar to the single page interpolation I did for the Melville piece. This is called Dr. No, and in fact, it's the in this case it's the movie edition of Dr. No, which I was kind of interested in too, because there's a connection between Casino Royale and Dr. No, in that Dr. No's the first Bond film, Casino Royale is the first Bond novel, and I was using the valise of the first Bond film in the Casino Royale piece. So this piece also involves a sort of continuing the torture of Bond in a particular situation. In this case, it's the scene where Bond is in the hotel room in Kingston, Jamaica, and he wakes up at night noticing that a tarantula, not a tarantula, in the novel it's a centipede, a poisonous centipede is crawling up his body, is traversing his body, and by an typographical accident that was fortuitous for me. The insect finds itself at the top of Bond's head at the bottom of page 59. He's poised at the very top of his head, and then on page 60, the insect walks off Bond's head onto the pillow, and Bond takes the opportunity to kill the insect. So what I did in this case, I wanted to make an addition, and I inserted a stainless steel page. I added a page that's engraved with the text engraved on stainless steel, mimicking the typographical format of the original, and continuing the movement of the insect, continuing just describing the continued movement of the insect back all the way down Bond's body to his feet, and then all the way back up again to his head. Because obviously, again, what I liked about this is it was a very specific kind of copywriting project that was given to me. I had to get the insect all the way down his body and all the way back up again in a certain number of words, given the format of the number of words on the page, giving the typographic format. So I took the opportunity to kind of describe various aspects of Bond's physiognomy that would be known to Bond aficionados, like the scar on his cheek, the little curl of hair, the little curve of hair, various things like that. So it ends up again on the bottom, and this is installed. The book is the additional page is on one side of this box structure, and the paperback movie edition of the book is installed on the other, and it was kind of intended to look like one of those fake books that contain like a liquor, like a little miniature liquor cabinet or something. Also, I wanted it to look kind of like it was disguised as a medical book. It was a kind of a boring medical book. In fact, it was really exciting. There's another view of it opening. Yeah, there's an example of this, of the placement of the stainless steel page and a close-up of the page. So that's my text. I tried again to continue the style of Fleming as much as possible. Just finally want to mention this little video work that's not really very successful, but it was something that I sort of had to make, and because it sort of screamed out, and it's kind of screamed out at me. This is a scene in the hotel room in the first Bond film, Dr. No. The scene that immediately precedes the scene where the insect is crawling up Bond's body when he's lying in bed. In the film, of course, it's a poisonous tarantula, because obviously it's more kind of, I guess, visually exciting, the idea of a large tarantula crawling up his body. In the book, of course, it's a centipede. And this is a second of two scenes in which Bond is kind of relating to this interior space of this room. In the first scene, he's just arrived in Jamaica, and he's just being shown to his hotel room. And this is this beautiful kind of, the decor is quite nice. It's not shown very well here, but it's kind of very classic 60s, early 60s decor. And he's kind of going in the room and checking it for bugs and stuff. He's kind of looking for, like any trace of like that it's been bugged or some way prepared. And he just kind of walks around, and then just before he plans to leave, he's in the preparation for leaving the room again. He kind of prepares the room by, first of all, he takes a little bit of talcum powder from his suitcase and puts it across the lock of the valise. Again, this is the valise that I replicated in Casino Royale. He puts a little bit of powder across the lock. He goes over to the wardrobe, plucks a hair from his head, and using a bit of saliva as glue, he glues the hair across the joint of the two kind of louvered doors. He does something else I can't remember. Then he leaves the room. And later in the film, about 10 minutes later in the film, he returns to the room. And this is the scene you see here. And it's shown, this particular scene is what interested me. He comes back into the room. He retraces all of his steps. He walks over to the wardrobe, notices that the hair has been removed, goes to look at his valise, flips it up, sees that there's a fingerprint in the talcum powder. Then he goes to pour himself a vodka, Smirnoff vodka. Then he sort of stops and checks himself, and then puts the bottle away and opens a fresh bottle and goes and then sits down. A peculiarity of the scene is that it starts and ends with exactly the same shot. Because this was kind of it was in fact a budget film. The very first Bond film was not a high budget film. Later, of course, they became high budget. And the very first shot of the film is a high angle shot of the door of the entrance to the to the hotel room, these louvered windows. And you see the light in the hall. It's dark in the room, and you see the light in the hall. And then you see the silhouette of Bond come in, enter the door, turn the light on, close the door, and then he goes about those actions that I described. Then after he pours himself a drink, he sits down in a chair and sort of pensively kind of starts sipping his drink. And then it cuts to the same shot, the room dark, with a view of the door with the louvered windows. You can see the light in the hall. And then that shot is cut just before. Obviously, we're talking about the same footage as we used in the beginning. It stops just before Bond enters, and it cuts to the next scene, the scene where he's asleep in bed. So it's just used as obviously the editor, the director, just thought, well, let's just use this as a transitional shot, just showing the room at night, and then it was a nice segue into the next scene, which shows him lying in bed in his pajamas. I was kind of interested in that there was this kind of implied loop structure, because there's this repetition at the beginning and the end. So I simply short-circuited the film at that point. I took this scene and I had it begin and end with the same shot, so that I respected the beginning and ending shot of the film, but I had it continue a little longer to the point where it came in the room again. So he's just endlessly going in and out of the room and going through these actions. And then I did a voiceover where I described from I described from Bond's viewpoint the entire story of the film in a voiceover, and with this particular emphasis on architectural details and clothing and things like that, starting from that point in the story. So, starting earlier in the beginning of the story, but there's a certain point where I'm talking about what's actually going on in the room, and then of course it's all out of sync again. It wasn't a piece that didn't really work. It turned out to be that successful, but I mean, for me, it was merely the fact that this kind of compulsion I have to make loops was like I more or less had to follow it up, and I think I'll just end with that. I think that's Sure, yeah.
Given that it is Friday evening and you've probably all got meals to go
yes.
to, we probably do have a few minutes for some questions if we have some questions.
Kind of late.
Yeah? Over here?
It strikes me from the beginning of your presentation that you mentioned sailors, the beginning you kind of address nature.
Yeah.
These laps.
Yeah.
So what occurs to me is in the media, the piece you get.
No, it's okay.
Oh, yeah. In the media, one repeatedly gets stories of fake surgeons who put on a white coat, enter hospitals, and manage to, one way or another, chop up patients and do all kinds of things and get away with it, perhaps over a period of even a decade. Alternatively, you get people who simulate diseases and illnesses, who are determined to, over, again, perhaps 10 or 20 years, get into hospitals to be chopped up by surgeons. Now, it seems to me that you are a case who, in the realm of art and literature, do something which could be compared to the activity both of the surgeons and of the patients. What do you think of that?
Yeah, posing. Yeah, I guess I'm posing. In some cases, posing as something else, and in order I mean, there's an element of mimicry involved in these interpolations, for example. I mean, that's just a mild. I mean, I have to parody the style of the writer, so I have to put myself in his place. And I did. Oh, is this not? Oh, sorry. I have to. Yeah. Anyways, I did admit to the the element of that I use mimicry in my work, and I guess that there is an element of sadism in it. But I don't like to compare myself to like somebody who poses as a doctor necessarily. But on a metaphorical level, maybe, okay, yeah. But I mean, it's more a question of mimicry. I don't know whether that answers your question, but I don't think. But I appreciate your question. Okay.
I think they're all too hungry.
Yeah, really, yeah, it's 6:30, that was long, actually.